I've been an educator for about 25 years, primarily with students with some sort of emotional, behavioral, or social difficulty. I have a master's degree in emotional and behavior disorders and one in educational leadership. Um, I hold level 1 PDA certification from PDA North America. I'm also a certified collaborative and proactive solutions provider from Dr. Ross Green's organization, Life in the Balance. But way more important than any of that, I'm also a parent. I've got 2 kids with disabilities, okay, one of whom is now a young adult and graduated from the Bellevue School District Transition Program, and the other is still a student in Bellevue School District. Both of my kids are neurodiverse. Both of my kids have disabilities that manifest in emotional regulation and behavioral difficulties. One of my kids has a classic externalizing PDA profile. You might notice when I talk about my kids, I'm going to be using gender neutral pronouns. I'm doing that as an extra layer to just remove identifying information about my kids to protect their privacy. Okay. So our agenda today, I'm going to do a really short recap of part 1. Maybe a medium recap of the strategies for home that we talked about already, and then try to dive more into strategies for school. Okay, so in part 1, we talked about the key features of a PDA profile and what made PDA different than other forms of extreme demand avoidance. PDA is typically, the acronym originated as standing for pathological demand avoidance. More recently, some people have said they prefer the term persistent drive for autonomy. And it is a profile on the autism spectrum. It is not a DSM diagnosis. It is a profile where demands are seen as threats to the nervous system. And it's the ask or the demand itself that causes distress. But that demand avoidance or oppositionality is not defiance. It's a nervous system response. And if you want to learn or know more about that, look at our resource guide. We also in part 1 spent a lot of time, important time, I think, talking about our experience as caregivers of kids with extreme demand avoidance. We talked about Dr. Destiny Huff, who created this concept called the invisible load that we as parents go through, where we see judgment from schools and society, comparison to other families, pressure to fix the problem. Let's make our kids' behavior better. We have more conflicts with schools and social communities than other families. Many of us are facing cultural and systemic barriers, especially if we are a family. I face a cultural and systemic barrier just around the neurodiversity aspect, but as a white, heteronormative woman, I don't face barriers around language differences or cultural differences or racism or gender identity. But there are a lot of people who do. And there are a lot of resources out there, by the way, for people who may be experiencing barriers on multiple levels. PDA North America, if you look, it's in that resource guide. They have a whole section on intersectionality and PDA. And Dr. Destiny Huff, I didn't talk about this last time, but she's a woman of color, and she has produced a lot of information for families of color navigating, especially preconceived notions about how people should behave and the color of your skin when you've got a behavioral regulation difficulty. So there's lots of resources out there about that. And then perceived failure as a parent. We've all been there, all of us who are parents, right? Our own perceived failures and others. So all of this leads to a really big emotional toll on us as caregivers: exhaustion, doubt, shame, judgment, so this is why stuff like what we're doing right now is really important, because in addition to like strengthening our skill set and knowledge. It's also providing a place for us to connect with each other and not feel alone. Okay. We talked last time about this wellness wheel, which the more I thought about, the more important I think it is, right? This is a concept that we can learn all the strategies we want, and I can talk about all the strategies that work, but none of those strategies matter if we're dysregulated or we're depleted ourselves, right? So that's why in part one, I gave a lot of attention to the self and to the connection piece of this wellness wheel, that green and the purple up there. Today, we're going to focus more on the practical strategies down at the bottom, those blues, right? But in this wellness wheel here, we've got in the connection. And we all need a sense of community belonging. We all need a peer support network, like positive relationships with others. We need effective services, implemented by educated providers. We need access to education and strategies that we can implement. We need caring for the self. We need a handle on our own emotional regulation and self-awareness. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that today. And we also need to make sure that we're managing our own self-care and wellness. So in the resource guide, I actually made like this wellness wheel is in the resource guide, along with a little activity to help you kind of think about where are my strengths, where are my weaknesses on this wellness wheel, and what are some things I can do to help balance it out. So as I said, we talked about the green and the purple a lot. Today, we're going to dive a little bit more into practical strategies, so access to education and strategies, and then effective services and providers. As far as strategies for managing PDA, we talked last session how it starts with mindset. So it's really about, I think every slide is going to make me click into each one of these individually. Sorry, you guys. It's about shifting our focus to connection and regulation, right? Rather than control or compliance. We talked about PANDA strategies last time. This is a new slide. Well, it's actually an old slide, but newly presented from PDA in the UK, the PDA Society UK, where the PANDA strategies are mnemonic, right? And I'm not going to go into this really in depth this time because we went into it in depth last time, but I will say, just go over what the strategies are. The P is, now they're calling it prioritize and compromise. It used to be called pick your battles, means the same thing. Just like, what hill are you going to die on, right? Anxiety management, negotiation and collaboration, disguising and managing demands, and adaptations. If you go back to the session 1 slide deck, there's attention given to each one of these in more detail. PDA Society from the UK also has a lot of resources on these in detail. Trying to think, yeah, that's about all I think I want to go into. Somebody asked a question about PANDA. Oh, would like to learn more about thoughts and PANDA strategies as applied to unstructured environments where there's lots of unpredictable factors. Okay, we will talk about that later. Okay, we talked last time about that low demand. I shared, was it this book? If you guys weren't here last time, I am recommending this book. This book is available at the King County Library. You can put it on hold. Amanda Degman wrote this book called Low Demand Parenting, which is all about helping us look at the demands inside our home, see what we can drop, and how to just kind of make our home a more low arousal and calmer place to be. This is embedded in the adaptation and anxiety management part of PANDA, but when we reduce demands, we're going to help kids feel safe, right? Which is going to maintain their regulation. Low arousal environment is an environment that might be more sensory friendly to your child, or if you have sensory friendly spaces in your home. My kid independently, I didn't even do this for them, turned their closet into like a low sensory little sensory den with a beanbag chair and soft fuzzy blankets. And when they need to, they can go in there and close the door, and it's really quiet and dark. And sometimes they bring the cat in there with them. Another low arousal thing we do in our home is we warn before loud noises. Sometimes we forget. But like if the garbage disposal is going to go off or the vacuum cleaner is going to go, it's like, hey, I am going to vacuum. Is this a good time to vacuum? Do you need to go outside? Are you okay with that? That's all part of having a low arousal environment. We talked a little bit about I think we talked about declarative language last time. Yes. So declarative language is where you take out the directive, but you leave in the information. Angela and I were talking about this before everyone else got on, and one of her questions was, well, like she's like, do you use this? And I was like, yeah, I totally use this. I use this all the time with my kid. And Angela said, how does it work? And then I said, well, what do you mean by work? Does it help my child stay regulated and avoid an escalation? 100% of the time. Does it make my child do what I want them to do? 50% of the time. A lot more, right, than if I gave a demand. A lot more than if I gave a demand. But we can't expect like declarative language to be a magic bullet to make our kid do what we want them to do. If it's probably our best strategy we've got, and it'll give us the best chance we have, but and it's going to keep them regulated. So I find it to be very powerful. I also find that for kids with PDA, sometimes they need a little more information than just like, oh, I noticed your coat is on the floor. They might need a little more information like, oh, I noticed your coat is on the floor. Um, oh, and there's the coat hook right there with nothing on it, right? So sometimes they need a little bit more help connecting those social dots. And we can do that for them using declarative language. Okay, so if declarative language is a way of speaking, co-regulation is kind of like, I think of that as a way of being, right? So we already know that as caregivers, we're the regulatory anchors for our kids. We're their emotional anchor, right? Um, and that's part of co-regulation. But co-regulation is more than being a calm anchor when your child's escalated. It also refers to a process and interaction where we're proactively engaging with our kids to promote connection, skill building, competency. In co-regulation, what we're doing is we are creating an interactive partnership where the partners are responding to each other every moment. Co-regulation is balanced. Each person contributes equally to the exchange. A really good example of a co-regulatory pattern or a co-regulation activity is playing catch. That's a classic example. I throw, you catch. You throw, I catch. It's reciprocal. It's balanced. We need each other to keep the game going, right? So hopefully that makes sense. Co-regulation promotes roles in the interactions that are competent. That means we're looking for roles that each person can actually perform. It's not outside of their ability set. They're authentic, which means they're meaningful. And the person who talks about this in this book right here, it's called the Co-Regulation Handbook, which is also available at the King County Library and is in your resource guide by Linda Murphy. She talks about it as being contingent. And by contingent, what she means is that it's done in partnership and both roles are necessary. I think of this as interdependent. She uses the word contingent. Okay. So if you're looking, this is a powerful, you probably are already engaging in a lot of co-regulation that you're just not conceptualizing as co-regulation. If you want to intentionally engage in intentional co-regulation, start looking at your daily routines and tasks as opportunities for social engagement, and then look at them through the lens of roles. Like what authentic, competent role can my child play in this interaction? And to put that in action, like think about something you regularly do and how this could be a co-regulation opportunity. So things like, okay, so when you do laundry, maybe your child can hand you items while you fold. That would be a co-regulatory activity. Or if you go to the grocery store, maybe your child's handing you the items or putting the items in the cart. That could be a co-regulatory activity. Now, if they're averse to anything they perceive as a chore, then you might not want to choose that as a co-regulatory activity. Games or leisure activities, like the catch example, also provide good opportunities for co-regulation activities. If you're trying to intentionally engage your kid in a game as a co-regulatory activity, be careful with games that have a lot of rules or a game that has a winner or a loser, anything that you know has historically triggered your child, probably not what you want to use for a co-regulatory activity. The games you choose need to be low demand, right? There's a good chance they're going to resist the demand of participating in some patterns. And this is where that declarative language can be helpful to help us engage in the partnership instead of saying, do this thing with me. So I don't know, if you want, like, think of an activity that you can try with your child as a co-regulatory activity. If you can think of one, if you want to put in the chat, go ahead and put it in the chat. Like, so my child is 15, not interested in a lot of the games and activities we used to do, teenager, right? So right now, our primary co-regulation activity is that every evening I comb their hair, which provides a lot of sensory and nervous system soothing, while they throw a toy for the cat. And then together we comment on the pet's actions. So in this co-regulatory activity, there doesn't need to be a product like folded laundry, or cooked dinner. It's an activity we're doing together. My role is to comb their hair. Their role is to throw things for the cat. What's important about that interaction is that we're building and strengthening trust and safety in our relationship. We're each playing an authentic role. And it's also bringing down my child's nervous system that has been activated all day long, because that hair combing, right, is very soothing. So if you're drawing a blank on what might be a good co-regulation activity to engage your child with, you can take it to your child too. Petting a dog. Oh, yes, that's a great example. Like, yeah, that's a good example, Samantha, because I'm thinking about you could both be petting the dog and talking about the dog, but like, if you have a dog, you're co-regulating with your dog too, right? Because the dog's getting something out of it, you're getting something out of it. But if you're drawing a blank on something that you can intentionally do as a co-regulation activity, you can be explicit using declarative language. You can be like, I'm hoping for us to spend some time together in a way that feels good for both of us. I'm wondering if there's something we could do together. See what happens. Maybe they'll say something, maybe they won't. 1 second. Sorry. So I'm still at my office. Because I have a kid with PDA who probably would not tolerate my being at home talking for an hour and a half. So that was somebody came in to clean, so I had to ask them not to. Yes, the recorded video will be shared later. Yes. Unloading a dishwasher. So we've got something Arthi said. Unloading dishwasher. I will arrange the big dishes. My kid helps with spoons and cups. Yeah, that's perfect. You're building so much there, right? Because you're strengthening your relationship, you're strengthening your trust, you're building a sense of competency in your child because your child has this authentic role and it's helping them build skills as well. That's a good example. That trust and safety we're building, that gets put in the bank, and that makes it easier and faster to engage in repair when things go wrong. We're going to talk about that too. Okay. Yeah, let's talk about when things go wrong. So losing control. I'm not talking about our kids losing control. When I say this, I'm talking about us losing control, because in order for us to be good co-regulators, we have to be in control, right? I don't usually hear a lot about losing our temper, but Every single caregiver in this session has lost their temper. Every single one of us has said horrible things to our child that we would be embarrassed and ashamed if other people knew we said. Every single one of us, right? This is human nature. We all do it. We don't talk about it. Nobody goes to work and says, boy, I totally yelled at my kid last night, right? And not talking about it just means that it just goes further and further underground. It reinforces those cycles of shame and isolation we talked about last time. Like we're over here comparing our insides to somebody else's outsides, being like, we don't see their worst moments, but everybody has them, and the truth is that caregivers of chronically dysregulated kids are pushed harder than caregivers of kids who don't suffer from chronic dysregulation. So our caregiving journey is unique. It's emotionally challenging in ways that push us past our edge, like over and over and over. Do you know why I made this slide? I made this slide because this weekend I was working on this slide deck at home, and I was really into it. I wasn't really paying attention to how much time had passed. And so I was furiously typing and doing all this work. And my kid wanted my attention. And they came to me like, Mom, 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 Mom. And I was like, I'm really busy right now. Please leave me alone. Mom, 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 Mom. 30 minutes, 30 seconds later, and I was like, no, I'm really busy. Leave me alone. And this kept happening until I completely lost it. I completely lost it. And I totally yelled at my kid. And then I had to pause and be like, how ironic is it that I'm working on this presentation for how to show up and be good caregivers to our kids while I'm screaming at my child? Um, the irony was not lost on me, nor was the need for us to talk about this, because I realized I did not talk about this last time and it deserves our attention, right? So I started to think about how we can't really implement. I know intellectually how I should be responding to my kid. I know the strategies. But if my nervous system's activated, right? Or maybe if my wellness feels unbalanced, I'm not going to be able to access that. And that's why it's important to pay attention to the wellness wheel. And that's also why it's important for us to have some strategies, right? We all have variability in our emotional resources. At any given time, we're going to feel less resourced or more resourced than other times. So here are some ideas. I want to hear your ideas. So here's some ideas that I've used in the past. Some of these might sound silly, but here's some ideas that I've used to just help me keep my temper, because I need strategies. I can't just magically be this calm person all the time. One thing I do is I've tried every single one of these, setting a daily intention in the morning and then reflecting before bed. I wake up. Today on the ride to school, I'm going to stay calm. At the end of the day, I then reflect, and you can do this silently to yourself. You can journal it. You can say it out loud to your partner. But it's the intention itself that I find can help me keep that goal at the forefront of my mind so I don't forget, right? Might be if the trouble spot is when I cook dinner, my intention might be, I'm going to just hold it together during dinner. I'm going to be patient. Another strategy that I've tried, and I know that other people have tried, is how our kids get little behavior point sheets at school? What if we did that to ourselves? I find it's really helpful. Behavioral scientists have found that just recording your own data can help you change your behavior, because it brings your behavior into your conscious forethought, right? So rate yourself each day. I don't do this now, but there was a period of time in the past where I tried this, and it was helpful. I had a little calendar. Yeah, we all deserve some stickers, right? Give yourself a sticker when you don't lose it that day, right? Have a little calendar. If it motivates you and helps you, try it and see. Here's one that I love. Find an accountability partner. So by accountability here, I mean somebody to we can hold ourselves responsible with. So that means like a regular check-in with a therapist or a partner or a friend. Like for me, checking in with my accountability partner weekly is really helpful. I report like how I did during the week. Like if there were trouble spots, I'm like, oh, oh, I was working on this presentation and I yelled at my kid. I would talk about that, talk about why that might have happened, talk about what I'm going to do differently next time. But engaging in that as a relational activity with another person is really, really helpful. And it's important. A therapist is good. If you don't have access to a therapist, a partner or a friend is great. Somebody you trust, because we have to be honest. It's not fun to just go and say, well, I just said this really horrible thing. We have to be able to trust the person to kind of hold that with us. Sometimes it's nice to make an accountability agreement with another caregiver. If you know another caregiver who's on a similar path with similar struggles, then you can choose to be accountability buddies. You can be sounding boards for each other. That can be really powerful. Pre-planning is another strategy. Look for your patterns. Review the times that you're most likely to become dysregulated. So we talked about, like, maybe it's when you're cooking dinner. Like if you know that's a trouble spot, pre-plan to avoid your own escalation, right? So if your child's like demanding too much of you during that time, that might look like, okay, to prevent this issue, I'm going to spend 15 minutes with them before I get started cooking dinner and then set them up with a video while they cook. So strategies like that, especially if these patterns become predictable. Practice recognizing and regulating your nervous system. The last session, we did that polyvagal ladder. I showed you that exercise, and I put that in the resource guide. So there's a link to it in your Google Doc. So you can go in there and kind of assess what you can do an exercise in there where you can look at how your body's responding when you're at different levels of escalation and things you can do to reduce that. And you can practice that using that tool. You can also just getting creative. I don't know. So I've been a parent for 22 years. The first six or seven, I was a single parent. And for a lot of that time, I was a solo single parent. I was very isolated. My wellness wheel had nothing. Like maybe I had access to strategies because I had a bit of an education, but like everything else, there nothing, right? I didn't have access to a support network in any way. And what I would do when I was having a really difficult time and I thought I might lose it is I would pretend I had an audience. And it might seem a little silly, but it helped me. I shared that with a friend. I was always kind of embarrassed about that. And my friend said, oh, I do something similar, but I pretend I'm parenting someone else's child because it might be okay to yell at my kid, but it wouldn't be okay to yell at my neighbor's kid. So I just pretend it's the neighbor's kid. So if you have a creative strategy, please share it. Please put it in the chat. These aren't the only strategies out there. These are just the ones I thought of. But we all need them because we all lose our temper and we're all human. And if there's something that works for you, it might work for other people. So I encourage you to share. But despite our best efforts, we're still going to lose it. So when that happens, we need to engage in repair. And we need to keep a store of trust and goodwill in the bank. So when I totally yelled at my kid on this weekend, once I realized what I was doing, I got up, and I apologized and I did repair. And it went pretty quickly because I was doing all the co-regulation stuff with the hair combing, and all the time we're spending together. We have a pretty good bank right now, right? And yeah. I know a lot of the questions at the beginning were like, what are the interventions we should use for these very specific scenarios? And a lot of it comes down to helping keep their nervous system regulated, which is about doing all this other stuff around co-regulation and relationship building ahead of time. So another thing I wanted to talk about around repair, speaking because is this notion of accountability. In session 1, somebody asked an excellent question. that I've been thinking about ever since session one ended. And I was like, we have to talk about this more, because the question was something like, um, at school, my child loses control sometimes and throws things at the teacher. What about, should we be holding my child accountable? And that was the question. And it just made me think really hard by, what does that mean? Like, let's unpack that concept of holding my child accountable. We hear this word accountability all the time, right? In families, communities, schools. Um, what examples come to mind when you think of holding someone accountable for their actions, right? Sometimes accountability, when I just talked about the accountability partner, right? So sometimes I was speaking about that in terms of like accepting and taking responsibility. Like sometimes accountability is repairing a wrong or undoing harm. But often in the context of schools or parenting especially, um, holding somebody accountable is just code word for punishment, right? Um, Loss of privileges, isolation, a consequence that's designed to create discomfort in the child. And one belief behind creating discomfort in a child after they do some harm is that it evens the playing field. It rights the wrong, right? It's human nature to think this way. But another word for that, if you really think about it, is revenge or vengeance. Like the motivation here is to instill a sense of justice of the wrong party, right? It's centering the victim of the interaction. It's about creating fairness and equalizing. Like, you did something bad to me, no, I'm going to do something bad to you. The other main underlying belief system behind creating discomfort in a child after challenging behavior is that the discomfort will lead to the child learning not to engage in the challenging behavior again, right? So we hear the phrase, well, teach them a lesson. I mean, and I think that people mean that literally, that punishment will teach them something, and for some kids it does. For a lot of us, we do a thing, a bad thing happens, we don't do that thing anymore. Our kids don't work like that. I've watched my kid for years just do the same maladaptive behaviors over and over and over and over and not understand why they were pushing people away, or why they don't learn that way. They're not learning from the social cause and effect. They have a disability that prevents them from doing that, right? Um, Punishment isn't going to teach them any more than a kid with a learning disability, right? Who has difficulty reading. No matter how hard they try, they might not be able to read a reading passage out loud without making mistakes. We wouldn't expect as a teaching tool to take away recess. We can see right away how ridiculous that is. Punishing a child for being unable to read, never going to teach them how to read. It's just going to teach them how to hate reading. But when it comes to behavior, we do this all the time. And then we sit and wonder why our kids are still struggling. Because we're not teaching them the social and emotional skills that they're lacking. What else do I have on the slide? I don't like that I can't see my slides until I click all these buttons. Sorry, guys. What else about punishment? It triggers survival responses like fight. It's not a reflection. It reinforces shame and disconnection, and that worsens behavior over time. It doesn't address the lagging skills that lead to the behavior in the first place. Okay, so what does true accountability look like? True accountability looks like proactive approaches. We talked about collaborative and proactive solutions last time. You guys have lots of links to it in your resource guide. If you want to learn more, get this book. It's available at the library. What else is true accountability? Repair after escalation. We can use declarative language strategies to help engage kids in repair. So, repair and reconnection. We need to engage in repair for ourselves, right? And our kids need to engage in repair too, because remember, we lose our temper, so we need to do repair when we lose our temper. Our kids lose their temper, they need to do repair. When we engage in repair around our own behavior, so we're both restoring the relationship, but we're also modeling for our kids how they can engage in repair as well. So, like the real life example of like when I yelled at my kid this weekend and I realized what was going on. I got up, and there we go. Those are the things I wanted to show there. I got up and I owned it, right? Wow, you were just trying to connect with me and I totally lost my temper on you. I'm sorry. Like I owned it. Um, the second step to repair is a step around reassuring, and when it's the child who needs help during the repair, it's might be reassuring we're not in trouble. In this case with my son, the reassuring was, I care about you. Like I care about you and I care about spending time with you. And then the resetting of connection. What that looked like was, hey, do you want, how about if I work for 15 more minutes and then I take a break and we play with the cat? And it was that simple, and it helped. And it helped because we had a relationship store in the bank from all those co-regulation activities that we had been doing. Or that example that was given by the parent last time around throwing the item at the teacher, in a case like that, repair might look like, it seems like you were having a really hard time in school this afternoon and things got pretty intense. Owning the moment, by the way, doesn't mean like shoving the behavior back in their face. They know what they did and they are so ashamed. I guarantee it. You don't need to shove the behavior back in your face to have them own the moment. Talk about their internal experience, right? That got really intense. You were having a hard time regulating, and I think your teacher got scared. And talk about the emotions, right? More than the actions. Because if you talk about the actions, then they might get into a shame spiral, a defensive response, and shut down. Reassuring, we really want you to feel safe at school. We want everyone to feel safe at school. And I think we can resolve this. And then resetting the connection. What do you think we can do to make this okay? And help them come up with, they're probably going to have an idea, but if they don't, you can help them. Like, do you think we should apologize to the teacher? What do you think is the best way to do that? If the repair is happening at school, the repair could look like, do you think you could help pick up that mess? Maybe when the other kids are gone to art, you can help pick up the mess. We're not going to try to make them do restitution in front of other people. That's really shaming. But if they did some physical harm, they can help. I brought up the example last session where my child has punched holes in a lot of doors in our house. And as the repair, my child, which is also, by the way, the helping to fix it is a co-regulatory activity, but to help do the spackling to repair the hole. My child then has helped do that when he has gotten that escalated. But you can collaborate with your child. Yes, literal repair, literal door repair. In which book can I know about declarative language? Oh, this book right here, the Declarative Language Handbook. So this is a book by Linda Murphy. It is in the resource guide that Angela put in the link. It's available at the King County Library. I feel like a lot of, like, I want to do a whole session on declarative. Like, we could do a whole session on each of these. There's so much to say about all of them. Okay. So anyway, that's what I have to say about repair and reconnection. And this all relates to school. I know we were just talking about this. We haven't gotten to the school session, but this really relates to school because this is what we're going to be expecting from our providers at school. These are the strategies we're going to be expecting in the classroom. We talked last time about collaborative and proactive solutions. There are resources in the resource guide. I really, really, really recommend it. I recommend it where that might come in, what that might look like for this example that this parent provided last time around the child throwing the things at the teacher. We might be looking at what happened before the kid threw the thing at the teacher. Maybe it was like doing a math worksheet. And in collaborative and proactive solutions, you try to get ahead of it by having a conversation at some point, like, I notice you have difficulty when it's time to do math worksheets. What's going on with that? And try to figure out what the child's concern is about the math worksheet. Maybe the child is so scared of fractions and doesn't do them and feels stupid. And if you figure that out, you can say, well, I wonder if there's a way we can do something about you learning um, more about this fraction concept, while we're still able to keep you engaged and safe in class. And then you guys can find some solutions based on the child's concern, not based on the adult's concern or the behavior, but based on the underlying concern the child had, the problem the child was attempting to solve in the first place. They didn't solve it in a very productive way, but throwing that thing at that teacher, that was the child attempting to solve a problem. What was the problem? If we don't know that, then any intervention that we design isn't really going to work. Hope that makes sense. But that's the kind of stuff that collaborative and proactive solutions addresses and talks about. So if you're interested in that, I encourage you to check out more of that. I might do a session next year. It would have to be like a 5-session. It's a pretty big, it would have to be a multi-session thing, but I might do it next year. If you want it, let me know. Okay, where are we? Oh, okay. So we're to PDA at school. Made it. Okay. Is it typical of how the PDA to resist the help? Even when, oh, it's totally typical of this question in the chat is it typical of a child with PDA to resist the help, even when offering to help with the math? For example, they shut down and won't offer any details about what's challenging for them. That is so PDA. Yeah. Yeah. We find this with our kid, especially now, that sometimes talking is a demand. Sometimes explaining is a demand. Answering questions are a demand, right? So when so Jesse's my husband, right? So he put in the chat the thing. It's because when we ask our kid those types of questions, Wendy, he often responds with either or the thing. It's so hard to get information out of this child. It is like pulling teeth. So we resort to things like making guesses and asking him to do thumb up, thumb sideways, thumbs down, right? Or I'm glad I'm not the only one, Wendy. Thank you for validating our experience. So we guess thumbs up, thumbs down, which sometimes they're not even willing to do that. Sometimes I do on a scale of 1 through 10. Sometimes it's a matter of just waiting till the right time. That time we have at night where I do the hairbrush thing, those and their sensory, the regulation system, I can tell when it's like really relaxed, like that's when I bring it up. But I have to be very strategic about when I bring things up, for sure. We can do a whole session on that one. So, okay, let's talk about PDA at school, okay? So the strategies at home, right, including the PANDA strategies, setting up low arousal environment, setting up a low demand environment, using declarative language, using co-regulation strategies, being proactive at problem solving with models like CPS. These strategies work across all settings, right? The fact is, unfortunately, that not all settings are set up that way, right? And our kids struggle a lot at school. So, yeah. So let's talk about how we can be their advocates, and let's talk about how to make their school experience a little better. All right, so there's a note on my slide deck that says skip this section if it's past 7 o'clock. Because I want to make sure I have time to say everything. And it's 6:56. So I think I'm going to go for it, guys. But I might go fast. All right. So I want to let's take a little peek behind the curtain. What are educators taught about behavior? What are your teachers thinking? I think it's important for us to kind of get some insight into that. All right. So this is what I was taught when I was in teacher school. This is what every educator I know uses to frame behavior and behavior interventions. Okay, so look at this table at the top. Don't look at the whole thing. There's a lot. Just look at the dark blue at the top. You've got a setting event, an antecedent, a behavior, and a consequence. Antecedent, behavior, consequence. A, B, C. Call it the ABCs of behavior. This is like 101 stuff for every single teacher, right? And it's based off of a behaviorist theory that I don't think I could talk forever about that. I'm not going to do that. Okay. So what teachers do is they identify a target behavior. I'm going off of this brilliant, beautiful example that our parent gave last session, throwing stuff at the teacher, right? So the school staff's like, oh, we've got this kid that's doing this crazy, throwing stuff at the teacher. That becomes the target behavior, right? So they start with the behavior. And then they look at possible reasons why the behavior is occurring. I mean, it makes sense. It's very logical. Why is this happening? Starting with the behavior, we would first look at the antecedent, the thing that happened right before the behavior. And then we'll look at the consequence. Consequence here doesn't mean punishment. Consequence refers to the end result of the chain of events. So I just made up this example. The parent last session didn't tell me this stuff. I just made this stuff up, okay? So let's just say that the child was prompted to get ready for reading circle. Then that's the antecedent. Then the child threw the stuff at the teacher. And then the consequence was the child went out in the hallway and didn't do any reading, right? So we can look at that data and form a hypothesis. When it's time to do reading, this child throws things to avoid reading, right? And based off that hypothesis, we develop interventions around the antecedent, the behavior, the consequence. And oh, by the way, even though this is called the ABCs of behavior, we have this thing way over on the left, that first column that I haven't talked about yet. That's a setting event. Setting events are environmental factors that contribute to a child's likelihood to use a certain behavioral strategy. So if they're tired, if they're hungry, if they didn't take their medication, if it's really loud, things like that are going to all be your setting events. Am I missing anything, Angela? Angela knows a lot about this too. No? Okay. So I'm going to design interventions to address each of these things. So a setting event intervention would be making sure that this child has a snack. An antecedent intervention might be giving the child a break card so they can opt out of reading, instead of throwing stuff. Or maybe an antecedent intervention was earning points for keeping a safe body. That's stuff we do ahead of time to kind of head off this bad behavior. A consequence intervention might be cleaning up if you throw things. We are taught as teachers that the most powerful interventions are antecedent interventions. And they usually look like things like positive. When you hear positive reinforcement, that's often in the form of an antecedent intervention. Sometimes it's a consequence, like after they did something and you say, good job, then it would be a consequence, but it's usually like proactive stuff ahead of time. So all teachers today are trained in this method. ABA is based on this theory. It makes sense, right? Makes sense, everybody? There's one kind of glaring problem with this model, though, right? It's based on behaviorism, and the theory is that behavior is reinforced. That behavior that's reinforced by a consequence tends to be repeated, right? So, and behavior that's not reinforced tends to die out. So the basic idea is that you have a stimulus, it gets applied, you have a response. I go to work, I get paid, makes me want to go to work again, right? Go to work is the antecedent, working is the behavior, getting paid is the consequence. It motivates me to do more going to work. It makes sense in a lot of contexts. So for kids, if we want the kid to change their behavior, we decide whether they're trying to gain something, whether they're trying to avoid something, and then we develop these antecedent kind of consequence things in between. What's in between the stimulants and the response in this theory, or the antecedent and the consequence in this theory, is often called, they call it the black box. The black box is basically a mystery box because it's unobservable and often implicit, right? We give the kid a point sheet. They keep a safe body. What's going on in between there in the kid's mind? We don't know. That's the black box. It's unobservable. It's often implicit. And according to behaviorism, we shouldn't really concern ourselves with what we can't see. What's important is what we can observe. And what we can observe is the input or the output. That's how most functional behavior assessments and behavior intervention plans at school work. There's a problem with that because what is inside that box actually matters a lot. It matters a lot for our kids. It turns out that for the principles of behaviorist interventions to work, you need some skills, right? We talked about these skills last time. You need executive function skills, language skills, emotional regulation skills, social skills, cause and effect, right? If your kids don't have cause and effect, cognitive flexibility skills. They also need just the capacity, right? If you lack skills, you can't shape behavior through antecedents and consequences. And that's why in that whole first slide, where it's like, what are the characteristics of PDA? The last characteristic is traditional parenting and behavioral methodologies don't work. This is why, you guys, because these traditional methodologies are based on assuming what's inside this box is a whole set of skills that our kids don't have. And that's why when we have functional behavior intervention plans and functional behavior analyses for a lot of kids and they're not making progress, this is why it's not working. You know, if the kid has these skills, then those strategies are going to work. If the kid doesn't have the skill, the strategy is not going to work. So as we know, these things don't work a lot of the time. There are some times they do, but a lot of the time they don't. Well, I'm going to say lecturing and power struggles actually never work. But some of these things might work some of the time for some kids in some situations, okay? Yeah, but here's the good news. At schools, I know this, I work in Bellevue School District. I'm an instructional coach. I don't know if I mentioned what my role is in Bellevue School District. I'm a special education instructional coach, okay? That's what I do here. And there is more emphasis and there is more awareness around neurodiversity, like every year, more and more and more. We're seeing way more efforts we have inclusionary practices Bellevue is really implementing. We're changing classrooms to fit the child instead of changing the child to fit the classroom. There's also, it's still more is needed, but a growing awareness of PDA and other disabilities that require more unique approaches. And then there's also a lot more awareness and teaching of accommodating and teaching these lagging skills. And thinking about, we have what we call multi-tiered systems of support. I don't have that on that slide, but we're really working on training our teachers more universal approach that's going to work for all kids, including kids with the difficulties that our kids have. And to that end, we do have some amazing teachers and support staff here. So some of them are on this call. We know that the stuff that works at home often works at schools. flexibility, relationship, autonomy, nervous system safety. And we have resources in that resource guide in the link, all sorts of like school approaches, IEP goal recommendations, accommodation recommendations. There's a ton of resources in there for strategies that may or may not work. So just like we need low demand environment at home, we need a low demand environment at school. Kids need autonomy. Our kids need a lot of autonomy, relationships, sensory support. If your child has an IEP, if an appropriate, meaningful IEP can really make a difference. And those behavior intervention plans, the setting event, we call it ABC, but like for our kids, the setting event is huge and it doesn't get enough recognition in behavior plans usually. So behavior plans that focus more on the setting events for kids with PDA can be really, really helpful. Skill set versus capacity. Okay, so why can behavior be so inconsistent at school? I threw this in here because sometimes teachers, we need to educate our teachers, because they think if Johnny, was doing this thing great for 2 weeks and now Johnny's not doing the great thing, that means Johnny's making bad choices. And that's not what's going on, right? And we need to be able to understand the reason behind that so we can educate our school teams, right? So why is behavior so inconsistent with kids with PDA? Because kids with PDA have chronically dysregulated nervous systems, and they may be more or less well-resourced at any given time. Demand stacking. What previous demands have I had that day, that week, right? How have those demands been stacking? How much sleep, nutrition? How's your relationship? Even if you normally have a good relationship, is right now, is it kind of on the rocks? That's going to matter a lot. How sensory stimulating is the classroom in the school environment? Yeah, these setting events, just what I talked about in FBAs and BIPs, these setting event strategies are like crucially important, right? And so even though our kids have demonstrated a skill in the past, they may not be able to demonstrate it at all times. When I was working on this slide deck this weekend, like I can demonstrate the skill of co-regulating and responding to my child appropriately, but I did not demonstrate it in a moment when I lost my temper, right? And it was because even though I had that skill, I wasn't making a bad choice. I wasn't paying attention to my autonomous nervous system, which got escalated, and I couldn't access it. Very similar things happen with our kids, but on a chronic level. Okay, so we have all this information. How do we help our school teams? What is our role? Setting event. There was a comment about, okay. So there's a comment in the chat. There was a comment above regarding transitions. In our kids' IEP, we had them allow them to leave class 2 minutes early so they can make their way to the next class without the chaos of all the other kids there. Yeah, that's right. I forgot that we did that. Because transitioning between classes with all the other kids around was like way too much. And so they got to transition early. The question that was asked earlier was a kid in primary school where they weren't transitioning from classroom to classroom. I think it was around more in classroom transitions, right? And we know with PDA, transitions can be difficult because transitions are a demand. We also know with PDA, like there's a lot of sensory system dysregulation and transitions tend to be a little more chaotic. So it's very sensory stimulating. So there's a lot of things working against you with transitions with kids with PDA. I think to help kids with PDA transition in the classroom, there's a number of strategies you can try. I wouldn't try any strategy without first talking to the kid though. I would talk to the kid and say, we noticed you're having difficulty moving from circle time to reading group. What's hard about that for you? And see what they say. Maybe it's the noise level. Maybe it's, I really like this activity and don't want it to end. Find out what their concern is and then try to address that concern. We were working with a kid I don't think this kid had PDA, but it's the same concept. We were working with a preschool kid. Angela knows this kid. We were working with a preschool kid who was having difficulty transitioning to lunch. And the kid, we found out from the kid that the concern was it was just noisy and really sensory stimulating. And so the kid would run out of the classroom and down the hall, right? Instead of staying with the group and doing what they were supposed to do. But when we realized that, then before the transition, we set up an intervention, which was very simple. We were like, you go in the corner by the stuffed animals where it's quiet and there's not a bunch of other people around. So we made sure that that intervention matched the concern of the child. So you can see where I'm not going to just spit out, well, here's the thing that's going to make the transition more helpful. Yeah, there's a menu of stuff like setting a timer, a visual timer, so they can see how much time they have, having quiet transition music, letting them transition earlier, letting them transition later. Like all of those things are things you can try, but if you're not addressing the primary concern of the child, it's not going to work. So yes, you have all these strategies, and make sure you know what the primary concern is of that child. Oh, that made sense. Okay. That was a sidebar, but good. All right. So here we are. We're the experts on our kids. We know the strategies that work. We know the strategies that don't work. So what's our role? It can be really hard for us to have a clear sense of this, especially as teams change over the years, our kids change, dynamics change. I really have struggled with this over the years. I'm what you call a professional parent. You know, I'm both a parent and like this is my job. I don't know if that makes it easier or harder for me. I get extremely dysregulated in IEP meetings. Um, I get really confused about the best way to move forward when I don't like something the kid's doing or the school's doing with my kid. I feel like just because I'm a professional, it doesn't really matter when it comes to me as a parent. That role of advocate is a hard role. Um, and I mean, for people, if you don't have an advanced degree or training, you're still the expert on your child. We're all the experts on our child. And I feel like as an advocate, it's our job to describe our child's needs in a way that prompts curiosity and not defensiveness, right? So we need to make sure that our kids, educators can understand. We need to problem solve together. Um, yeah. Um, Educating your team. So framing their needs as nervous system accommodations. I'm constantly reframing for my child's team. I'm taking their language and I'm reframing it and rephrasing it in a way that I feel is more accurate to my child, right? I do this with teachers as well. Like I was in a coaching scenario with a teacher where it was a high school student who was in the hallway, spending a lot of time in the hallway and not a lot of time in class. And the language that was used in that conversation was that the student was making poor choices, right? And that's my trigger whenever I hear bad choices, that's where I'm like, ding. So I confronted that one, you know, because it seemed to me that the student was making a choice that addressed their concern about what was making it difficult for them to go to class. And what their concern was, none of us knew because nobody asked. You know, so I was kind of, you know, I prompted the teacher to ask, what's the concern here? And that helped the teacher as well realize it's not just about bad choices and good choices. It goes so much deeper than that, right? Um, let's see what else we got. Partnering, not pushing. Okay, so behind the scenes, I'm just going to be straight with you. Teachers hate emails. I don't think they're allowed to tell you that, but they hate emails, right? So everything I'm going to be telling you from this point forward is with that lens. So now with our kids at home, we're working on building safety, connection over compliance, right? And with our school teams, we're working on building empathy and collaboration over confrontation, right? And if you wanted a guaranteed strategy to stress out a teacher, start sending them multi-page emails on a regular basis. I mean, and I know there's a lot to say because I have a lot to say too, okay? But if I'm writing an email and it's going over 3 or 4 paragraphs, that's kind of my signal that this is better handled as a meeting than an email. One thing that I don't know what just happened. Angela, can you unmute yourself?
Yeah, I got it.
Something weird happened to my computer. Can you guys still see my PowerPoint?
Yeah.
That's really weird. I think my computer just like, I'm gonna have to, I'm gonna try something again. You can see my slide?
Yeah. It's partnering, not pushing. Oh, now I can't.
Okay, I lost my slide and my computer made a really weird noise. I was really worried it was gonna like restart. I think I'm gonna have to like go through these all over again.
We're on
Okay, so Angela, tell them
38.
about ChatGPT. Making your tone better and making things shorter.
Oh, so I use ChatGPT a lot, and it helps me with emails because I can write in the prompt. We're on slide 38, by the way, if that helps you. If you write in the prompt, please make this in a friendly tone and no longer than 4 sentences, and then put in whatever you're going to write. I just typically word vomit in, and then ChatGPT does its thing and it comes back and it has the content that you want, but it's in a friendly tone and it's no longer 4 sentences. So it's perfect. I don't know if anybody else wants that tip, but I can tell you all kinds of tips with ChatGPT.
Yeah, Angela taught me that one. And I use that, as a parent because I've had to send some like, you get it all out there. And then I'm like, make this 6 bullet points in the ChatGPT. Oh yeah, people do that at work too. So I was really grateful to learn that trick. Another thing that I like as a parent, and this stuff may or may not work for you, but I like relationship building, I feel like is really important. And so I volunteer or help out, if and when you have the capacity. I work full time, but like once in a while I volunteer for a field trip. It has the added bonus of I get the eyes on the interactions and the dynamics, right? So I can check out what's going on there. But it also builds some goodwill and relationship and trust, right, with the school team. I like to meet in person and not on Teams. Because it's really easy on Teams for people to turn off their camera and completely check out. You don't even know if they're there. Um, we talked a lot about using intentional language, reframing things like about a disability instead of choice. Um, if you guys please put in the chat if you have strategies that work well for you on building good relationships with your school teams. Here's some more, like in the context of IEP teams. Bring an ally, share your story. Use language of regulation and autonomy, bring the resources. I don't want to send an email with like, this is everything about PDA and everything you know about my kid. That's too long. But I will bring those resources, those handouts to the IEP meeting. And I'll even highlight the ones that are applicable to my child if I've got a 3-pager. Like these fit my kid. Making sure we're asking strategic questions. Now, as a special education coach, as an instructional coach, asking the right questions is one of the most powerful ways to prompt a shift in thinking among educators. So here are some questions. Here are some sample questions. If you have good questions, please put them in the chat so other people can benefit from them. How will this intervention help my child with emotional and sensory regulation skills? When my kid was in 2nd grade and having all of these problems, they decided they were going to do a point sheet. And I asked that question, and they had no idea. They just knew point sheets are helpful. But it prompted us to kind of problem solve together, and we decided, okay, we'll do a point sheet for data collection purposes, but we know the point sheet's not going to teach them the skills. So they had to do something else to teach the skills. I didn't tell them that's not going to teach my child how to behave. I asked the right question and they realized it themselves. Okay. How are we ensuring my child's nervous system and sensory needs will be met throughout the day? That's a great question to ask. What's your plan for avoiding escalations? Understanding that the antecedent, now we can speak their language, right? Understanding that the antecedent may not be predictable or obvious. What's your plan for responding to escalations if one occurs? What do you see as my role? What's the best way we can partner? There's a million, good questions. These are just some I thought off the top of my head. Please contribute if you can think of others. I also want to give some time to this I think this is a really important topic because this is our reality. And just because I work for a school district, I'm not going to pretend that this doesn't happen. If you showed up tonight, there's a really good chance that you've received the phone call or the email or had the stern talking to in person. You know what I'm talking about, that conversation where your nervous system is going to go from green to red, right? Or maybe you've just learned the school has implemented an intervention that you know is inappropriate for your child. Here's a little sample. I'm calling to let you know that Timmy said mean things and pushed his friend on the playground today, then refused to line up at the end of recess. It's my hope that you can speak with him about making better choices. We don't want him to lose his recess privilege. Has anyone had anything like this happen to them? I'm going to guess, maybe if your kid's really little, no. But I'm going to guess for most of us that's yes. I've had a million of these in different ways, forms, something like this. My alarm bells when I see this are ringing for a lot of flags. So the first flag here is there's a focus on negative behavior, but no context, no emphasis, no language about what the child might have experienced prior to that behavior. That word, better choices, indicates that staff may see this behavior as entirely under this kid's control. And there's a hidden belief behind that he could do better if he really wanted to, which we know, bull crap, right? Another red flag here is it's asking the parent to solve the problem. Could you please speak to your child about the importance of physical safety at school? Yeah, sure. It's not going to change anything. And then the other red flag is threatening punishment, right? This removal of recess. You guys, this happens. It's going to happen to you if it hasn't happened already. So what do we do when that happens? Okay. There's a little quote here. My older child had this amazing therapist named Alan Frazzetti, who I love. And he used to say all the time, do you want to be right? Or do you want to be effective? And I thought, oh yeah, I'm channeling Alan on this slide because my brain jumps right into action mode when stuff like this happens. But it's really, really important. You have to stop and proceed with caution because we're really mad when this happens. But what we have in this example is an illustration of a team that needs education. And the biggest roadblock to growth is defensiveness. Okay. We have to look at this as a number of opportunities to strengthen the team's approach, but we're going to miss those opportunities if we don't center ourselves first. So before you even engage with the team, pause. Use a regulation strategy. Use your vasovagal ladder. It's in your resource guide. Are you regulated enough to be an effective advocate right now? And then, how big is this issue? Are the issues raised here a big enough concern that it needs more dedicated time and attention? And that example with all those red flags, heck yeah, right? I need a meeting for this one. And so I want to buy myself some time, and I want to make sure that they have enough time and attention to give to this. So I'm going to request the later conversation using some nice language. This is very concerning. I appreciate your communication. I don't appreciate how you but we're doing our best here. I hope we can problem solve together. This is going to take some thoughtful consideration. Can we meet as a team on Tuesday after school? I'm asking to meet and I'm asking them when to meet. And so if they're busy, then they can say, I don't just want to say, can we meet? Because then it puts the ball in their court and I don't know how quick they're going to respond. So I'm going to suggest a day and time. And then, oh, an email for ChatGPT to help with, totally. And then your second step is because now you've bought yourself some time, you can use that time to get clear on your goal and what your desired end result is. Like, I want the school to change their practice. I want improved communication. I want whatever. Figure out what it is you want to get out of that meeting and use that extra time to strategize, which we're going to talk about. And then, only then, proceed with engaging in this conversation. Sometimes we don't get to do this because they catch us off guard and it's in person. But if we can, I have found this to be so helpful. I've had my husband like stop me. Like, I wrote the email and he was like, no, no, no. But yeah, it can be hard. So once you have that conversation, here are some strategies you can try. State your shared interest. That's a really, really good way to start because you want to focus on your common interest, right? And the common interest is helping the child do better, right? I appreciate that we're both interested in helping Timmy stay regulated on the playground. I didn't say, well, we're both interested in helping Timmy make better choices. No, I'm very clear that what we're trying to do is help him stay regulated on the playground. They used the wrong language. I'm going to flip that and use the right language. And then, oh, yeah, that's part of this, reframing the issue with more accurate language and empathy building. It sounds like despite his best efforts, he couldn't access the skills he needed to handle that conflict with his friend. I know he feels upset and ashamed about this. Maybe he went home from school and cried, If he did, share that. I know you're aware that he tries very hard and wants very much to do well, and he cares about his friend. So I'm glad you reached out to me to collaborate on approaches we can take to help him. So I'm using this language of collaboration, even if I'm not feeling it, right? That's the language I'm using. And then these other things, by the way, these are not conversations to have over email. I think that email can be important to document and outline concerns, to summarize decisions and outcomes, but it's not necessarily the format or the forum for resolving a lot of this stuff. So review. Okay, I'm thinking about the time. It's like 7:28. I'm just going to go through this real quick, and then I'll stick around if people have questions. Review and assess effectiveness of proactive strategies in place. So we want to figure out, what are you doing now? Like, I'm curious, what's currently in place to monitor his nervous system regulation? See how I'm just using these words to help them understand what his disability even is, right? Before and at recess. So, and I'm weaving in like their responsibility so that staff can intervene and help when he's starting to become dysregulated. I'm taking that where they're like, will you talk to him? And I'm giving it back to them. This is your job, right? Should we revisit signs and signals of dysregulation? Also reviewing and assessing effectiveness of responsive strategies. So what are you using when you notice he's starting to become dysregulated? What repair strategies did you use to help him repair his relationship with his friend? Again, I'm putting more of the ownership here on the team. And I'm not being accusatory, I'm being curious. Like, how did that work? Should we brainstorm some others? This is how we become effective collaborators. And then finally, we are advocates. So we're going to advocate for any of our desired outcomes. In this case, I do not want them taking recess away from my child. Heck no, right? So after I've had this conversation, after I've helped them reframe what's going on from bad choice to emotion regulation disability that we're responsible for addressing, that's when I might say, okay, can we agree that recess is important here and that we're not going to take it away? Um, I find using this approach to be more effective than just saying my concerns. It's more collaborative, it's more interactive. Do people have thoughts, questions? No. It's a lot to wrap your head around. So you have a slide deck where these are in the slide deck. All right. So the next several slides are just practical tools and strategies and samples. So an about me sheet. This can be really helpful at the beginning of the year, right? So this is just a little cheat sheet, here's my strengths, here's my interests, here's what I need help with. Here's some proven strategies. It's short, it's sweet, it's concise. This is a good way to introduce your child to teachers, something like this. There are examples of stuff like this all over the internet. If you Google it, you can find it. This is a list of sample accommodations. PDA accommodations should be ones that always maintain autonomy and reduce pressure, right? PDA'ers also have a lot more sensory needs that can be addressed through accommodations. So this is a list of sample. There are more sample accommodations linked in that resource guide. So check out your resource guide. Here are some IEP goal area ideas. Flexible thinking, adjusting to change, transitioning from one activity to the next is a great IEP goal because most PDA'ers have hard times with transition. There's a quick tips to the classroom sheet that you can give to teachers that is linked in the resource guide. This understanding and supporting PDA handout. This has highlights in it because we did this one for my child's last triennial reevaluation meeting. We printed this out and we highlighted the ones that were true for my child. Because not everything on here fits my kid, but I was like, this is for my kid. We brought it to the evaluation feedback meeting. I wouldn't give this to all of my kids' teachers because I don't think they're going to read it. But at that feedback meeting, we're like, given this, what are you recommending? And this is uploaded and part of their special ed file. So Wendy, I do not have a formal or professional statement saying my kid is PDA. And I just tell people my kid is PDA. And they accept it. And most school teams do. And remember that, PDA is not a diagnosis. So you're not going to, there are some people out there who will say you have the PDA profile of autism, but not a lot. So it's hard to get that from a professional. The resource guide's going to help you guys. And if you want more, fill out that interest form. I think my email's somewhere on, not my school email, but my Gmail is actually on that resource guide somewhere. So if you have more questions, just send me an email. And I'm thinking about, somebody talked about disruptive behaviors, even starting simple assignments being difficult. It's not like for this particular behavior, here's the particular strategy. It's about for your particular child, what helps regulate their nervous system. The nature of PDA is to avoid demands. So our kids are going to avoid demands. And what we want to do is we want to regulate their nervous system and reduce the demands. And educate our schools and our providers on what PDA is so that they can figure out. There's a whole thing I do for teachers, by the way, where we do an exercise around looking at your classroom routines and seeing what are the hidden and embedded demands and which ones can you get rid of. So there's work that you can expect your providers are capable of doing that you could suggest to them as well. I'm not surprised that the PDA'ers refusing help with math. Again, you want to get to the concern about what's the problem there. They may not be willing to talk to you about their concern, especially if it's a hot topic area. And that's where it can be a very slow process to understand a child's concern. It might be multiple conversations over multiple days. It might be using the thumbs or the rating scale or yes or no questions. Somebody said the school team's working on the IEP, but so far the usual interventions aren't helping. Again, I hope this whole presentation told you why. I'm not surprised. If they're like typical behaviorist interventions, you know now why they're not helping. And I hope that you have the resources now to go to the team and try to get them to pivot to something different. Okay. I'm going to stick around. I'm going to turn the recording off. So if anybody wants to ask questions that they don't want in the recording, they can, and I'll stick around for a little bit.